gotta make it out to Vegas, where the lights shine bright. Vegas, in the clear desert night. Vegas, where they can make you a star. Vegas, at the NFR.
NFR Extra is a podcast dedicated to the Wrangler National Finals Rodeo and features icons and personalities that embody the Western lifestyle.
Well, I think anytime you're announced as an icon anywhere, that's a great honor. And then the people that they've named already are people that I'm very proud to be associated with. And I think that means a lot to me. I guess some of the other things that mean a lot to me with the National Finals Rodeo is the fact that the effect that it's had on the production and the change in the whole rodeo business.
This is pro rodeo announcer Andy Seiler, and you are listening to NFR Extra. Well, this will be a fun conversation today because we have one of the most interesting men in all of the rodeo world, Shawn Davis, with us. And Shawn's already told us we could talk for 3 hours, but usually our format is not that long. But Shawn, first and foremost, just tell us how you came to be in rodeo when you were growing up.
Well, for some reason, it seemed like I was born to be a cowboy, I guess, but we had a ranch, and then my grandparents were wonderful people, and I loved to stay with them in the summertime. And they had a little farm in Butte, Montana. And they had calves and animals, and I had an uncle that wanted to be a cowboy, and was a brilliant guy, but didn't have much talent as a rodeo contestant, but he knew everything about rodeo. And so I would stay with him in the summertime, and from the time I could walk, they put me on goats and then calves. And I just graduated up through goats, calves, and then went to ponies, and then I went into 4-H rodeo because there was nothing else, and it was so evident that I was just there to rodeo. They made my mother sign a release that she made sure that I had a project, and that's how I was introduced into as a youth. And then we went into high school, college, and professional rodeo.
What led you to pick Saddle Bronc specifically?
Well, I think Saddle Bronc picked me because Jim Shoulders was my hero. And I wanted to be a bareback rider and a bull rider. And I don't know how we knew so much, because the only thing that we had to identify is my uncle's conversation about rodeo. But in Montana at that time, all them better cowboys would come to the rodeos in Montana. And with that, I rode barebacks and bulls. And bulls in Montana at that time, the Brammer didn't fit Montana, because I know one of my friends was in the stock contract and bought some straight Brammers, and they froze standing up in the barn. And but the bulls were mainly native bulls, and they aren't like they are today. And so I was quite successful at a very young age, because as we mentioned earlier, what I would do and where I got a lot of my experience is I had a neighbor friend, and his dad was a bronc rider, and he wanted him to be the bronc rider in the best way. Well, my parents were very opposed to rodeo. And so I'd get off the bus every night, and they'd have the cows up, and I'd ride one with a bull rope, one with a bareback rigging, and one with a saddle. Only at that time my saddle was an 8-fork, so it was difficult. So and then I would going home. I'd have to walk about 1.5 miles to go home, but there was a creek, and I always fall in the creek so I could get my clothes muddy. So my mother, at least I thought she didn't know I was getting off the bus and practicing a couple 3 times a week at our neighbor's place.
Man, that is commitment, even at a young age. I love that.
But then what happened is I had several friends, but my mother and dad would never sign the release for me to enter the high school rodeos. And there was a high school rodeo, and Montana had districts at that time, and then they had a finals. And it was a White Sulphur Springs, and I had a friend, and he was a brilliant guy, but he was about as uncoordinated as he could get. And he always wanted to be better, ride better than I did. And I had another friend that was very talented, and so when I entered the rodeo, they let me handle all the entering. So I entered White Sulphur Springs, and I put him in the bronc riding. Well, my uncle had all the equipment, so I had saddles and everything. And because I had jobs breaking horses, I had a lot of experience at a young age breaking horses. So we get to the rodeo, and of course we get there early, and they hadn't drawn yet. And so when he sees his name on that he's entered in the bronc riding, he agreed to ride broncs if we would ride broncs. And that's how I got so I entered the bronc riding. And of course, the activity that he created, he dropped his rein and grabbed the front of the saddle, and the horse stepped on the rein, and he had a big wreck. And I ended up winning part of the bronc riding the first time I ever got on.
Wow.
And for some reason, and I thought it was a saddle because I don't know how many head of horses I rode at the rodeo, because I'd enter because I could win the all-arounds. And but I rode a lot of horses before they ever bucked me off a saddle bronc. And I thought it was a saddle, but I had an old turtle with a center fire that my uncle had. And one day something happened to my saddle, and I had to borrow a saddle. And when I did, it was like putting on a seatbelt. But that's how I got started in the saddle bronc riding. And it just seemed like it was, I could naturally ride saddle broncs, even though I had a lot of success in the bareback riding and the bull riding. I won regional and national college championships and all-around champions in those events also.
Wow.
So how much did it take money-wise for you to win your first world title?
Well, this is my first world title. I won, I think it was $25,900 and some dollars. And it was my first year out of college. And that was an all-time money-winning record that lasted for 10 years. And the next year I got injured. In '66, I got injured and couldn't ride till June. And I didn't enter any rodeos till the 15th of June. In Cheyenne, I was 5th in the standings, and then I got injured again, but I ended up 5th, I think, in '66, and in '67 and '68, I won almost as much as I did in setting the world or the money record, but just a little less. And then in '69, I was having by far the best year that I'd ever had, because I'd won probably a third more money than I'd ever had in May in the saddle bronc riding. And I entered a rodeo for a friend in Thompson Falls, Montana. And I was in Woodard, Oklahoma, and I'd won the bronc riding there, and there was a huge storm. And so I called him and told him I wasn't going to be able to make the rodeo. It was his ranch rodeo, was a professional rodeo. And I was in the bareback riding, and I guess we should have been self-warned, but anyhow, I told him I'd try to get out through the weather, and there at Woodard, and it was like a sucker hole, and the sky cleared momentarily. We flew out through there, flew to Thompson Falls, Montana, and when we got there, the airport was a cop duster strike, and I should have never landed, but I knew I could get off. I left had my companions that was with me go to Missoula. I could pick them up in Missoula if I let some air. So we landed, and the bareback horse I had was a local horse that they'd had out. They said 17 times, and nobody had ever ridden him, but nobody probably ever got on him and could ride. And what happened is he was coming away from my hand, and I was spurring him, probably which he'd never had a top cowboy on him before, and he flipped over backwards, and the first thing that hit was my shoulders and him on top of me, and he severely broke my back. And so there is some story to that, because there was no ambulance there, and there was no doctor. And when I asked him to leave me alone, I said, a lot of times you'd be hurt but not injured. And so they did. And when I turned over my legs, when I went to put my legs on me to get up, I couldn't get up. They loaded me in the ambulance, and of course everybody there was partying. But the only medical help was a vet, and they loaded me in the ambulance, took me to and slammed my hand in the door. So
The vet is taking you to the hospital and you're slammed into oh my goodness. Continue.
I'm going to tell you a little more of the story. And so they take me to Plains, Montana, in the back of this station wagon, and x-ray me at a clinic. And I don't know why they would x-ray me, but you can see that my back was not only broken, it was dislocated, plus the vertebrae, they go up and down your spine. I don't know how many of them were broken off. So they bring me out, lay me on the grass. They get a call in the bull riding, a contestant that broke his leg. So they wait for me. They put me on the grass on the lawn. The sun is shining at least. And then they get there with the kid that was riding bulls. They put us both in the ambulance, and we're going to Missoula, which is 100 miles away. And by this time, I'm really realizing that what accident had happened, because I was really in pain. But I hear the tires turning slow, and finally I get attention, and they run out of gas, and we're coasting. We're coasting and at least there was a downhill grade, and we did coast into a gas station and get some gas. 5 hours later, I ended up at the hospital in Missoula, Montana.
Wow!
But it was
oh my goodness,
it was a life-changing, because my goal was, and I had quite a bit of success, was to basically beat Casey's record, when he had 6 world championships, and I'd won 3 out of 4 in a row. But anyhow, I was in a body cast. Well, it took them about a month and a half, because it was real complicated, the operation, and they said that there's only been 3 other people that had lived through that kind of an accident, and so it was about 6 weeks before they got enough information to operate. And when they did, some of my back had started healing back, and so they didn't move me in. I was actually fused inch out of place in the lower back portion, and so I never had the same posture as I did before after the operation. But then they put me in a body cast, and I spent another 6-8 weeks in a body cast.
So that obviously changed the trajectory of your career and what you did following that, correct?
Yeah, and actually it probably was why I ended up doing the things that I'd done, because when I come back, what happened, I went to Europe. I got a job. I went to Europe with a rodeo, and was in the management part of the rodeo, and done a lot of publicity. And actually I was in charge of the Native Americans, and I put them together on the Sioux reservation. But when I come back, Jim Shoulders offered me a job teaching his rodeo school. And at that time you didn't, or at least I didn't have any therapy. I just worked out on my own, but I'd work out every day. And I'd lost about, I'd say, at least 40% of my athletic ability of what I could do. And so at the rodeo school, Jim said, you want to get on, forget the name of the horse. It was something blue, but it was the most perfect saddle bronc in the rodeo business. And I was somewhat hesitant, because I didn't think I was quite ready to ride, but I said, but I knew I had to make a decision if I was going to ride again to do. So I said, yeah, just run him in. And I did have my saddle and equipment there. And so they run the horse in. I got on him and rode him. And it was probably the worst ride that was ever made on him. It was the ride I'd ever made, and stayed on one. But in doing that, I found out that it didn't hurt. So 2 days, Jim asked me if I wanted to get on him again, and I did. And I rode him like he was supposed to be. I had the confidence. I rode him like he was supposed to be riding. And then you could enter, and Gladewater was going on, and I entered Gladewater and won both rounds in the average at Gladewater. But I never could ever ride like I could prior to breaking my back. Even though I qualified and was in the lead for the world and so on, I qualified another 5 times at least for the national final rodeo. But I could kind of win on about a high percentage of the horses that I drew before I broke my back. And after that, the draw affected me. I had to draw them to win.
So how did that transition into becoming a candidate for the president's position of the PRCA?
Oh, that's another story. It seems like when I go back and analyze all this, I was meant to do what I ended up doing. And so as a contestant, a quick story, we were at the Cow Palace, and I had no interest in politics or being part of the political part of rodeo, because I learned later, you're never popular.
That's for sure.
As my friends, even though I didn't drink or smoke or myself, I come from a family background where I got along well with anything that was going on. And so we're at the Cow Palace at the rodeo, and Paul Mayo, John Edwards, Clyde Van Voris, and 3 or 4 others, of course, go to the bar where the local toughs are, and in the Cow Palace and get in a fight. So the PRCA board calls them up before the board, and they asked me to represent them, as a joke, I just went with them. And so when they asked, when they had us seated in front of the board like school kids, and they asked me what I was doing there, and Paul Mayo said, "Well, you come here to represent us." So when I did, I just told them that, basically that these guys had gone to the bar, they was being harassed as cowboys and belittled as being cowboys, and they took up for themselves, and they won the fight. And I knew that the board would be fair, and I thought that the only way to present this was to throw it on the good judge of the board to make the decision. Well, they let them off for some reason, and there was only a week or two that they replaced the vice president, and the board asked me to serve as vice president to finish out that term, and that's how I got into the politics of that. And I served that term, in which I still didn't have any interest in. And then, as Dale Smith had done a great job, but anybody he done 15 years as president, they come and ask me if I would be interested in running for president, a bunch of the contestants, because there was things they thought should be changed, and we'd follow kind of the same path for a certain amount of time. And I said, no, I wouldn't be. Well, anyhow, this went on for some time, and I finally agreed to run for president, hoping that I wouldn't win it. But I did. I was elected, and at that time, I had some ideas, and one of the ideas, of course, led into the National Finals Rodeo.
Now, where did that idea spark from? Because obviously, now it's a super popular decision, but at the time, I can't see everyone thinking, "Oh, we need to go to Las Vegas with our biggest event."
It absolutely. What happened at Oklahoma City, and Oklahoma City actually was the one, because I attended and competed at Los Angeles, and was just aware of what happened. But I was always very, very interested, and I don't know why, but everything else that kind of fit, like the saddlebronc riding, I was interested in the National Finals Rodeo, and I always pay attention to what little we could information we could find out. And when we were in Oklahoma City, when it come from Los Angeles, it was questionable whether it would exist. Oklahoma City built it from nothing to sold out performances. The problem, what had happened, is that the production of the rodeo had got to where it was a 3.5 to 4 hour production, and Lynn Butler, who was come to me after I was elected and asked me if I'd come and sit with him, and he said, "Well, I want you to pay attention to this, because if you don't do something about bringing this rodeo together to a tighter production, if you look over there, every time it has any kind of a weather problem or that, you don't have any people here. The tickets are all sold, but you don't have it. And if you don't bring this into time frame that would satisfy the needs of the people, that this rodeo is not going to exist.
Right.
And so as president in Oklahoma City, I tightened it up, and that's where all the different rules and things come into place that was made it possible to be competitive as entertainment package in Las Vegas.
So then it comes down to the vote. I want you to highlight that section and what you remember, because I've heard personally a lot of different versions of this, but I want to hear from you.
Well, and we need to probably tell the story as it was, because like you said, there's lots of different versions of it. The situation was that's where my racehorses. There was a track about 10 miles from the college, and I was overtraining some racehorses at Drone. But then you didn't have cell phones, and there was a payphone on the wall at the track at the stalls that I were using to hold the horses in while I was training over there. My secretary calls me and said, I got a call from a man by the name of Harry Wald from Caesar's Palace, and he wants to talk to you about the National Finals Rodeo. And so she gave me his number, and so I just called Harry on the payphone and said, this is Shawn Davis, and so on. He said, well, the reason I called, would you be interested in Las Vegas entertaining a bid for the National Finals Rodeo? And I said, well, Oklahoma City's done a great job. We're sold out there. So, I'd be interested, but it's going to cost you to make that change to get the support. You'd have to make it pretty interesting. And of course, I'm talking just surprisingly, but I didn't know, because I'd been good friends of Benny Binion for years, that the city of Las Vegas in December had shut down about 40 to 60% and needed an event. Being pretty, I was over my head as president, let alone negotiating with Las Vegas. And so I said, he asked me if I'd be interested in setting up a meeting at a time. And I said, yes, but let me get back with you. So immediately I called Benny Binion and I said, Benny, who's Harry Wald and what's the situation on Harry Wald? And he said he's the CEO at Caesar's Palace, and he's a good guy and he's dependable. And so I said, well, I explained to Benny what had happened. And I said, would you be interested in going to a meeting with me and Harry Wald? And he said he would, because I knew in Las Vegas, and it proved to be true, that if I didn't have more support and influence in the city, or I didn't think I could handle it personally with my experience level. And so we met with Harry Wald, and they discussed the rodeo, and I told them that it would cost it. And then also I did have an experience with Harry Wald, because we had this circuit, the Wilderness Circuit Rodeo Finals, supposedly to be held at Caesar's Palace. Well, I think it was a Mike Tyson fight. And so it gave me a chance. Caesar's Palace called me and wanted to know if I would give up that date. And I said, well, and I went back to the PRCA board, and I said they wanted to know if we'd give up that date. And then I went back to Harry Wald and I said, well, Harry, we've planned this. This is the situation that we've planned. And, if we'd be willing to give up the date, but it's going to cost you. And he asked me the price. I give him the price, and he came up with the money. And so I knew that Harry Wald was good. So with that, I went back to the board, and one of the reasons is Oklahoma City had done a great job, but I knew if rodeo was going to go somewhere, it had to be more recognized. And also it would have been a benefit to the Cowboys. So with that, I went back to the board and explained to them, and there was definite different opinions. And so what we did decide, once they got, we decided that we had to be very fair with Oklahoma City because of what they'd done for the rodeo business. And so we set up a meeting a year from that time after the national finals, because we didn't want to have any changes until after the national finals rodeo was over. And in Colorado Springs. And like I said, we didn't have cell phones. And so we set up in a hotel where no one could go in or out of the meeting from the time it started. But also that each committee would come in and make the proposal. We would take a straw vote. So we'd have all the questions answered correctly. We'd have each committee come back in and make a reproposal, which would take the final vote. So in the straw vote, it come up in favor of Oklahoma City with an extension that counted as a Oklahoma City vote. And so with that, when they come back in, Las Vegas Events raised their bid on $90,000, and Oklahoma City made their proposal on a mill levy that wasn't passed. So that put some question about what was it. The voting situation was the directors were pretty set in their opinion on how it was going to go. So when it come around and we voted, the straw vote changed to a Las Vegas vote, which tied the vote. And because I definitely thought that we had to upgrade the opportunities for rodeo when it come to me, they said, Mr. President, it's your decision. And I said, we're going to Las Vegas.
Well, we thank you
What
for
a
that
story.
decision. My goodness.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's take a quick pause, and we'll be right back. It's that time of year. It's time for Vegas. Finding your custom NFR experience can start now. This resource makes your NFR planning so much easier. At nfrexperience.com/stay your way, you can shop for the hotel that best fits your plans. You can find information on viewing parties, concerts, price, transportation, location, and so much more, all in one place. Don't waste time searching for your NFR experience. We have you covered. Go to nfrexperience.com/stay your way. It's time for Vegas. Stay your way.
And we're not telling you anything you don't know, Shawn, but you and that group of people changed the rodeo industry forever with that decision. So, I mean, did at the time, did you foresee what was going to happen, or did you just know a change was needed and something had to be done differently?
Well, I wish I could say that I could foresee what was going to happen. What I thought would happen happened, but that was one of the highlights of my career, and it happened to end up in Las Vegas. But see, we had 5,000 more seats to sell. In the first 2 years, we didn't sell them out. And the third year, we sold them out. And when we sold them out, but you can't imagine now, you see some politics and threats. I had them back there.
Right.
Basically, I had to stand on my own, but it was about a 50-50. And some of the strongest supporters later on, especially the stock contractors who was totally for staying in Oklahoma City, except about 4 or 5 people, was very, very dedicated to Oklahoma City. And we all were dedicated to Oklahoma City, but it was a business decision. But when that was a big relief when we sold it out.
Took a few years to realize how good it would get for you. I'm going to have you highlight a little bit about Benny Binion specifically, if you could, and what that relationship looked like. Well,
Benny Binion, I've heard about Benny Binion forever. Benny Binion was a great person. He helped a lot of people, and he done a lot of things that was unknown, but for some reason, Benny Binion always liked me. Now, the first time I met Benny Binion personally was at Calgary, and my friend Jim Houston, who was world champion bareback rider and just a year or so ahead of me in his success, was a great guy. And he come to me at Calgary and he said, Benny Binion just asked me to come get you, and he wants to meet you. So at that time, I met Benny and his family and become great friends with him. Becky and I went to college together in the University of Arizona. But anyhow, being a friend of Benny Binion and knowing Benny Binion, because all my dealings with Benny Binion was I could depend on him. And I knew that his input on the city of Las Vegas was, huge. And that's where would give me the confidence to make the decision. And on the other hand, Benny Binion had, like the Goms and the Boyds and all those people were automatically friends of Benny Binion's. But if it wouldn't have been for Benny Binion, I would probably have never had the confidence to make the decisions, which paid off later on, because there was a lot of changes. When we first went to Las Vegas, I think Las Vegas is at least 8 times bigger now than it was in the city. It was kind of a cow town. And the Thomas and Mack, it had some great, it was a basketball arena and it had a dumpster, and we come in one alley and exit that alley and had to bring the contestants down. And to organize that, because I knew when we went to Las Vegas, we had to have a time frame that fit that city or the rodeo wasn't going to be successful. And to get that under control, and of course, we had years at Oklahoma City as president. I had 3 years. I took that rodeo in Oklahoma City, the finals, and restructured everything and put it so the contestants come down an alleyway, so they didn't have to come to the arena and waste all the time in the arena, and also had rules and enforcements. So we had 3 years in Oklahoma City before we made a decision to practice how, and that's where the gold card room come in. Because our older contestants could just show their card and go sit in the arena. Well, it really affected the arena. They turned calves back, horses back, different things, and the contest was changed. And I had to clear that up. And I talked to Ken Stimler, who is a great asset to the rodeo business. We wouldn't be where we are today if it wasn't for him. And so that's where I started. The gold card room started to exit the gold card people out of the arena, and I catered it both. I put little video on that we had showed the old video of the national finals. We catered it both food and cleared that amount out, and then the rest I had to through changing the procedures at the rodeo is how I was able to put the rodeo in the time frame that we put it in.
What about the development of Thomas and Mack within the production here over the years?
Well, of course, when we first went to Thomas and Mack, and it was, like I said, there was no back entrance. And so we had and then also there was a trash compactor that blocked one side of the entrance we had. So everybody had a pass going in and coming out. And so to do that, and contestants don't always cooperate, So we had to enforce that, but they would come down but the second year we got the trash compactor moved, and then that's when we started development, because at that time the rodeo and the rodeo fans and that were traditional, and most of the seats, if you notice if you went back then and now, but even now, you'll notice that we've got a pretty sophisticated audience. They're pretty well dressed. They're compared to, say, the PBR, it's a different audience. And so they were traditional, but I didn't know tradition. We had to upgrade to meet the challenge of Las Vegas, which was a time frame, but also, there was we had, for instance, we had a rodeo band, and then what happened there, we got so many people, we needed the space. So where do we put the band? But also we had to upgrade that. We had to make it fun. We didn't have crowd participation. You sat there and had a rodeo, and you didn't have any crowd participation. You just announced the rodeo, which would work. But in my mind, we had to upgrade and make it fun. So they come to fun, and you had to reach the youth. And some of the benefits of that, where it happened, was I was coach at the College of Southern Idaho. which give me a workforce that I could control. And actually, the College of Southern Idaho to begin with was a good part of our workforce. The other part of our workforce there was my buddies, the Benny Reynolds, the Dean Olivers. I had more people working I had more buckles behind the chute than I had in front of it.
That is awesome. How unique to hear the transition, one of not only the building, but also the production and the workforce in its own. And then you phase into becoming the GM of the NFR in 1986. I mean, you touched a little bit on that, but talk about a few of like the rules that were put in place under your guidelines or the time frame specifically.
Well, here's what happened as GM. See, we basically in the contract we had to have a GM. That was contractual. The first year, and I had Sonny Deb Backstrom and Jerry Persley, John Burke, and we done everything with notes. I had 176 things on my checklist for the building.
Wow.
And at that time, the openings was created. I knew we had to have things like that. And Cotton Rosser done all the openings for the first few years. Then James Harper done them a couple of years, and so that and Jim Sutton. So I didn't have to do openings at that time. But basically, we Sonny Deb and I and John. Basically, John helped at the Rodeo, but we created all of that, and we also run the convention that year. So with hand notes and no computers and so on, it was quite a challenge to begin with. And then a lot of my base people was because we had to set up security, because I knew if we let the security, to do that, there just was no space. And that's where the rules changes, but it was actually beneficial because at that time we wrote rules so there was no one in the arena to affect the contest. We had different rules that we had to manage so we could keep the rodeo going. And they were all created for the benefit of the rodeo, but it also helped the production because by doing so, we could keep it in a 2-hour time frame.
Well, and that has bled over to the rodeo industry as a whole. I mean, you're seeing more and more performances try and get towards that 2-hour time mark because in all honesty, the American attention span, doesn't last much longer than 2 hours anymore. So that was quite visionary on your part as well, Shawn.
Well, and that fire was, well, I always knew that because as a contestant, I done a lot of publicity work for some very good people, not knowing that it would later in life benefit me. But because I was a college graduate and with non-drink, and I didn't drink or smoke, at that time in rodeo, they were trying to change the image. So I got to do a lot of things. And also the Cowboys themselves did not want to talk to the press. And people like Lex Conley, Tommy Steiner, some of the greatest people at new production would offer me deals to come and work on the publicity and ride at the rodeo. So I got a great background, and basically those people back then said you have to have a time frame. And if you want to keep it exciting, you have to do things. You have to add things to the rodeo, and I got great ideas from those people that I used both. And when I went to the College of Southern Idaho, I didn't ask any of the right questions when I accepted that job. And when I got my first paycheck, it was about a third less than I thought it should be. But I found out that and also I didn't have a budget. And so, and I wasn't smart enough to say, well, how am I going to put all this on? They had a beautiful building, no budget. But so I just got on the phone, and that's where we got Benny Binion involved too, and called Benny Binion. Benny Binion would have all of my students come to his ranch in Montana. Not all of them, but I'd take about 20 some kids to the ranch in Montana. We'd run in about 400 head of horses. He would cut 100 head off, and we would buck those horses, and he would cut off 30 of the best and give them to us and send them to the college and send them in a truck. Then we would sell some at the bucking horse sale. And a friend of mine who rodeoed, Ralph Maynard, was in the starting to produce rodeos, and he needed bucking horses, and he'd send me money. But I had the workforce, and I actually brought the people that set up my arenas and the college that actually set up the arenas to begin with in Las Vegas.
So with all those experiences, all those memories, and all those people, I mean, what does it mean to you to now be announced as one of the Vegas icons for the NFR?
Well, I think anytime you're announced as an icon anywhere, that's a great honor. And then the people that they've named already are people that I'm very proud to be associated with. And I think that means a lot to me. I guess some of the other things that mean a lot to me with the National Finals Rodeo is the fact that the effect that it's had on the production and the change in the whole rodeo business. And most of the ideas that you see in the rodeo arenas tonight, from the openings to the lights and I think one thing that at the National Finals Rodeo, the coordination and the fact that we ended up actually coordinating everything from the time that the announcer speaks to the music to whatever, because there was one time we couldn't hear him. When we come back and we reorganize that, because there's a time frame for everybody to speak and everything, to do things, to clarified everything, and everything is able to run smooth and keep the excitement level to the end. I think I'm as proud of being able to do that and have so many great committees and people follow that model that we set.
No, I couldn't agree more, Shawn. And we really appreciate your time. We just need to know which horses to bet on at Remington Park. Is there any way you can help with that? Or
I'm picked to win tonight, so
Got it.
I'm picked to win the last 4 outs, and he runs second or third. So don't bet much.
Well, no, we really appreciate your time, Shawn. This has been an absolute pleasure, and thank you for everything that you've done, not only for rodeo, but for the city of Las Vegas.
Well, I sure appreciate that.
Thank you, Shawn.
Thank you.
Want to experience more of the NFR? Then visit nfrexperience.com, and we invite you to subscribe to NFR Extra on Apple Podcast, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and wherever you're listening right now. If you like what you've heard on NFR Extra, we would love it if you gave us a 5-star rating and tell your friends how to subscribe.